I think my rest of the co-instructors are here. Dr. Prashant Bavankure, I welcome him. He's here as well. I can see him there. Uh, I would also like to invite Dr. Shilpi Narnavre. Is she there? Shilpi?
She's there.
Okay.
Go ahead. We started. Instead of introducing more, let's move fast.
Yeah. Let's go ahead with the topic. The topic that we have today is debates on in vitreoretinal surgeries, and we have some very good topics to discuss about. The first one that we'll be talking about is on whether to do ILM peeling in primary vitrectomy for retinal detachment. And for that, Dr. Bavankure will be talking on whether we have to do it always, and I'll be talking against it. Please go ahead, Dr. Bavankure. Go ahead.
Thank you, Shamik. Yeah, thank you, Shamik, for this wonderful opportunity, and AIOS for considering our instruction course. So let's start it. Let's start the debate. So the point of debate is whether we should do internal limiting membrane peel in all primary rhegmatogenous retinal detachment where we are doing primary vitrectomy. And I say yes, of course we should do ILM peel in every cases of primary detachments if we go in. Well, every one of us know internal limiting membrane is the innermost layer of the retina. Is it a savior that we need to save it? Or is it a devil in disguise? Let's understand that before we debate the question whether we should remove or not. Well, we all accept that the role of internal limiting membrane is essential as it binds the growth factor during the retinal development. But in adulthood, the role is controversial, rather there is not yet understood. That's what the studies say. Well, is it like a vestigial organ like an appendix, which has only a nuisance value? For sure, I know that it works as a devil in these diseases, like diabetic macular edema. It is responsible for development of full thickness macular hole, epiretinal membrane, and recurrent proliferations in recurrent retinal detachments. Well, about the savior is a big question mark. There is no particular thing. Now let's understand various disease processes and how the role of internal limiting membrane moves. In retinal detachment, all the studies have shown that if you do an internal limiting membrane peel, the success rate climbs from 84% to 96, almost 97%. Importantly, in all these studies, if you go through what is the cause of redetachment in retinal detachment, almost 32% of the patient had redetachment in non-ILM peel group. And importantly, why does redetachment happen? And why is ILM peel important? ILM peel ensures completion of posterior vitreous detachment. And it is in fact more than 20% of the patients have undetached vitreous cortex as a reason for redetachment cases. This is our article published in IGO last year supporting the same hypothesis. Not only recurrence, it is also about reproliferation on the macular surface in the form of epiretinal membrane, the incidence of which is as high as 33 to 85% as per the study shown below. ILM peeling removes the substrate which is responsible for reproliferation. Then what are the disadvantages of internal limiting membrane peel? Well, my friend is going to say it will cause big terminologies: dissociated optic nerve fiber layer, electrophysiologic changes, increased inner layer thickness. Well, these are all transient. And do they have any functional consequences? He should ask himself. He would also talk about chromophore toxicity, damage to Mueller cells, paracentral retinal holes, microscotomas. But friend, all this is safe. And more importantly, it has no effect on the visual acuity, and that is all what my patient wants. You would also talk about more surgical time, chances of iatrogenic trauma, but it is a matter of skills. So work hard and acquire those skills. Expensive because of dry eyes, finesse loop. Well, is resurgery not very expensive? It's more so. And also you do not want on a post-operative review a picture like this, which will give frowns on your forehead. all these conditions will ask for second surgery. And from patient's perspective, it is one more surgery. And from surgeon's perspective, yes, I know you as a surgeon, you might look at a patient as an ATM with more financial gain, but definitely not for the patient, poor patient. So when you have a procedure which gives you double benefit of preventing epiretinal membrane proliferation and recurrent RD, why avoid it? So don't forget the basics of medicine. In PSM, we have been taught prevention is better than cure. Here I lay my case. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for a very well put up case. I would like to put up my case here. I'll just share my screen.
Have we lost him, Shamik?
Who? No. I'm here.
Yeah.
So, so I'll go ahead with my my PPT over here. So, with the improvement in surgical techniques and constant evolution of technology, primary vitrectomy in RD is the treatment of choice in most cases. However, individual surgical variations are abound. Some prefer 36 degrees laser, some don't. Some prefer PFCL, some don't. And some prefer belt buckle, and some don't. But likewise, me and my senior here are debating about peeling of the island in primary vitrectomy for retinal detachment. At the outset, I would like to say that every treatment variation, in our case the surgical, is right as long as the patient is benefited. However, we need to gauge or balance what is right for the patient, as he rightly said. So, coming to the basics, indications of ILM peeling in VR surgery are a few: macular holes, epiretinal membranes, macular edema, myopic macular retinoschisis, retinal detachment. So, I have been blamed of talking about chromophore toxicity, phototoxicity, damage to Muller cells. Well, yes, they are there. Indocyanine green, we all know, has an affinity for laminin and collagen type 4, and we all know that it has been documented side effects like field losses, multifocal ERG changes, thinning of the retina, that is structural, and we cannot get rid of that. Reduced enzymatic transmission, it is a biochemical change, and it is going to be permanent. So, but then these are dose-related effects, osmolarity-related or photooxidative quality of the compound causing cellular damage. And these damages at the cellular level are going to be permanent. Trypan blue, yes, but then this needs to be diluted, needs to be used after posterior highlight removal and after doing a fluid exchange. It does have neurotoxic effects on the ganglion cells. And by chance, if it has entry to the subretinal space, it can cause RPE degeneration as well. These are again dose and time dependent. So longer the duration of trypan blue staying inside the eye or on top of the retina, more are the chances of it causing damages. So as has been told, chromophore toxicity is there. Triamcinolone acetonide, another one of the favorite medications which we use for ERM or ILM peeling. The crystals adhere to the vitreous, ERM and ILM. It does not have a well proven but can cause effects similar to the ICG. Delays healing, especially in macular holes. Again, they say this is controversial. But then what I have always thought of is crystals of this very triamcinolone can cause direct physical damage to the retina if PFCL is being used, and these crystals sometimes are so adherent to the ILM that they don't come off. Phototoxicity, yes, we all know photothermal, prolonged exposure to light. Sometimes we have to hold the light pipe very close to the retina to have a peel. Photochemical, due to excitation of endogenous chromophores like photoreceptor pigments, RP pigments, or exogenous chromophores like ICG. These cause reactive oxygen species causing cell damage, again a permanent damage to the retina. Damage to the Muller cells, again I was blamed that I would be talking about this, but yes, these are definitely caused when we do ILM peel because Muller cells are closely associated with the ILM. And microscopy has shown that Muller cells have been peeled off along with the ILM tissue. These in the long run may cause paracentral holes and paracentral microscotomas due to reduction in retinal sensitivity. This definitely needs expertise to reduce trauma to the macula. These are surgeon-related issues in ILM peeling. When we use PFCL to flatten the retina, commonly when we are doing the pinch and peel technique, the flap tends to fall back because of the weight of the PFCL pushing it down, and then we have to again try to catch hold of the ILM. And every time that we are trying to catch hold of the ILM, it may cause some amount of injury to the surface of the retina. And if we are confident enough, we can do without the PFCL. And but then it is very difficult as there is no counter traction. In this case, we were trying to do a removal of the PVR membranes. And then as we try to induce, start the ILM peel after injecting blue, BBG, the ILM peeling becomes very difficult with the pinch and peel. Invariably, we'll end up doing some injury to the retina again. So then why to peel the ILM prophylactically in every primary vitrectomy for retinal detachment? This is my question to Pawan Kulesar as well. But then there need to be specific indications. In my case, peeling is not indicated in fresh RD without any PVR changes at all, or when we are planning for a gas tamponade, or if the surgeon is novice. I know I am not a novice, but then I wouldn't want to cause injury to the retina just for the sake of removing it prophylactically. Peeling definitely is indicated in PVR changes, vitreous hemorrhage, RD associated with macular hole. When we are planning for siliconoid tamponade, there are larger breaks or giant retinal tears, or if it is a combined or recurrent retinal detachment. Thank you. Yes. I need to stop sharing my screen. Right. So next we have. Next, I will call upon Dr. Shilpi Narnavde, working at Sarakshi Netralaya, to talk about encirclage in vitrectomy for RD, which she thinks is a must. Shilpi, please go.
Yes, sir. So good afternoon, everyone. At the outset, thank you, AOS and Shamik, sir. So yes, I will be speaking that encirclage is must in every case of vitrectomy in cases of RD. Skippins, long way back in 1960, said that RD is a manifestation of complex interrelationship between retina and vitreous, and it is not an isolated disease, just like vitreomacular interface disorders. So let's go back to basics. Vitreous base straddles peripheral retina and pars plana, and it is the strongest attachment, and its removal in toto is impeded by the posterior convexity of the lens and non-availability of the convex vitreous cutters, which means that it is impossible to remove 100% of the vitreous. Now, if you look at the etiology of the recurrence, the reopening of breaks and the anterior PVR is one of the most leading causes of the recurrence. So the failure rate after the single surgery without encircling band is almost around 28%. Also, anterior PVR contributes to approximately 86% of the recurrent RD cases. The prognosis is poor if it is because of anterior PVR, and also the vitreous incarceration if seen in the sclerotomy sites. So there is the need of encircling band in cases of all the cases of RD, as it supports the base. It not only approximates the layers of the retina, but importantly, it relieves circumferential and AP traction. Incomplete tamponade fill leads to residual fluid cuff between the tamponade and the retina, which is tackled by this encircling band. Only vitrectomy means incomplete base excision, or else the risk of lens touch in phakic patients leading to lens removal, or in cases of pseudophakic, it will lead to subluxation or decentration of the lens. Well, my opponent will say about base excision with models like Carl Class, but for us, it is like a Ferrari in the hands of a driver who is accustomed to Maruti 800. Residual fluid cuff, I have already alluded to, which is the truth because of the residual vitreous in all the positions, whether it is supine, upright, or the prone position. True medicine is evidence-based. So these are the various studies which shows the superiority of combined surgery over the plain vitrectomy. This meta-analysis in 2018 showed protective effect of encircling band in prevention of recurrent RDs after SOR. This meta-analysis of 1,704 patients clearly showed odds ratio in favor of PPV with encircling band. In cases of inferior RD, also in the pseudophakic RDs. Primary retinal detachment outcome study recently published in 2020 in Ophthalmology Retina clearly shows the superior single surgery success rate with encircling band in all types of phakics and even in superior retinal detachment cases. Besides this study showed that the additional benefit of protective effect against the progression of diabetic retinopathy. And friends, if you have a recurrent RD after vitreous surgery, it is more severe and less forgiving. Yes, nothing is perfect. Limitations is the truth of life. My worthy opponent will talk about more morbidity with buccal, that is the short-term gain often leads to long-term pain, while initial pain means long-term gain. He will talk about the myopic shift, which is usually 2.570, and for presbyopic, it is of the glasses. While for other patients, you can think about refraction if you have attached retina. But in an attempt to avoid the glasses, if you have failure, then what is the use of emetropia? So now, and he will also talk about the buccal infections. But with sutureless scleral buccal, this limitation is also taken care. And also you look at the infection rate versus recurrence. So to a surgeon, the time should not be any consideration. Long-term investments like mutual funds versus short-term investments like stocks can lead to crash as well. So friends, encircling band is time-tested and has long-term benefits. So well said. Trendy is the last stage before being tacky. So, ek se do bhale, and it's always better to combine the strengths of the buccal and vitrectomy for improved success. Thank you.
Very well summed up, Shilpi ma'am. Now I'll call upon Mandar to put up his case. But I just wanted to make a point over there that not all mutual funds are supposedly crash safe. Okay, yes. Because Franklin Templeton did crash. So don't take it to heart. Mandar, please go ahead. Mandar is a dynamic vitreoretinal surgeon from Kolhapur, and he'll be talking about how he feels that encirclage is a must, is not required at all. Mandar, please go ahead.
So my case, my colleague has put a very nice case why you should still stay in the old vestiges of the surgeries and you should still continue the old school, but to stay. Well, we are now seeing the increasing trend towards the primary vitrectomy. Earlier, which was done as a surgery of exclusion in RD. Now it is the surgery of choice. This is the evaluation how we have come out in vitrectomy for retinal detachment surgery. Now, what are the perceived advantage of encirclage? What she talked about. One, well, there is a recurrence, fear of recurrence without not putting the buccal. Buccal so-called relieves the traction, and for inferior breaks, it's caused ineffective tamponade by oil of gas. So we have to give a buccal effect to protect against the tamponade of the inferior breaks. But there are now multiple factors which in the recent 10 years or 15 years have come, which just obviate the need of the buckle in the cases of surgery for a vitrectomy in the nasal detachment surgery. There are better instrumentation, better illumination, better visualization, and the small gauge surgery and fast cutters with the tip close to the with the cutter tip cutting close to the tip of the cutter gives it tremendous control over the hands of the surgeons. So what are the shortcomings told and how we can resolve these? So inadequate inferior buccals, inferior support or tamponade. I will talk about the results of some other studies. But most important thing is good vitreous clearing and meticulous vitreous-based shaving. No relief of traction. She talked about no relief of tractions, how it is difficult to remove the vitreous from the pars vitreous base. Well, it is not so difficult nowadays. You have a good depressed vitrectomy surgeries you can do. You have good visualization system which makes you able to look almost up to the almost beyond the area anterior to aura. So with the depression, either with the direct under microscope, you can see the aura and beyond and anterior to it even. Here you can see anterior to it even. And do a surgery like this. Okay, it's not playing. Or you can do it under the wide angle microscope, wide angle visualization, depress it. And mind you, most of the cases do not lead to any lens touch if you do it properly with due care. And this step is actually essential in even if you do the even if you do an encirclage with it. This step is not optional, and this step is going to take the same time even if you do an encirclage or you don't do it. Now, there was no scientific conclusive evidence is there. She had shown me so many studies. I have my own share of studies which showed so many almost equivalent outcomes in both ways. See, there is some difference in 1 or 2%. She had also shown 2% higher. Does it carry any meaning in the real clinical practice? So this is meta-analysis. I have these studies, many studies, which shows good outcomes of the pars-plana vitrectomy alone, even in the presence of inferior breaks. Then there is a Viper study, which is multicentric prospective randomized study for treatment of vitrectomies, which directly compared vitrectomies with or without buccal in pseudophakic patients. And guess what is the result? Encirclage band does not significantly reduce any second procedure necessary for reattachment. And mind you, this is in 20 gauge vitrectomy. In 23 gauge and 25 gauge, the difference will almost be negligible. They have produced a third subgroup analysis in this for inferior breaks, where also it doesn't show any significantly improved primary anatomical success. Now take this with the problem of encirclage. She also admitted this in problems. Shilpa admitted that it is time consuming, it more invasive, it takes half an hour more. Some for seasoned surgeon, it will be 20-30 minutes more. There is a risk of perforation, choroidal hemorrhage, prolonged recovery time. But more importantly for me, these are the short-term problems. More importantly, it leads to more inflammation because you are handling the globe more. It causes more inflammation, and that itself shall lead to more PVR. It induces complacency in the surgeon that I don't have to remove the vitreous base. I can just, my buccal is there to help me. So I don't have to really go and remove all the vitreous base or shave it totally. This tends to leave, and this makes you leave a lot of vitreous behind. And with this, the encirclage, getting the vitreous blaze closer, it causes contraction of vitreous blaze, promotes it, and leads to recurrence. Now, long-term complications, she also had admitted, but I want to change that, add some more, that there is a disturbed ocular surface because you are doing peritomy, and there is conjunctival scarring leading to loss of potential area for a future bleb, which with glaucoma is common in post-vitrectomized eyes, particularly if you use silicone oils. So ask yourself, is it really worth spending that time and energy, causing more inflammation and pain of the patient to the patients and long-term issues for that merely 2 to 3% difference in the single operatives record, single surgeon success rate. And in no doubt, I have no doubt that it is an unnecessary wastage of a procedure. We should do away. Thank you.
Very well put up, Mandar. So now what do we do? Finally, that's the question. Anyways, we'll move ahead now and we'll have all the questions in the end. I will now call upon Dr. Bawankure sir to tell us about, to put up his case about the 3D heads-up display, and let's see how he wants to convince us to get this new equipment.
Debate.
Thank you, Shamik, once more. I
Huh?
think I'm audible.
Rating.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
Yes,
yes.
sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I'm going to debate against Dr. Bhushan Khare from Pune. Bhushan, best of luck to both of us. So here is it. 3D heads-up surgery is the need of the hour. Well, very well said. Change is the only constant in life. This is how I operated and this is how I operate now. Why? Magnification. Can you ever imagine epiretinal membrane being peeled at such a phenomenal magnification previously? No, never was it possible in this. Now look at another case of a macular hole, full thickness macular hole. I'm doing an inverted ILM peel technique. And you can see not only the finest of the retinal architecture, but also the ILM edges, which was never ever seen so well at such a high magnification during the surgery. Now look at another case instance. This is base excision, which I'm doing under microscope. Can you see the individual fibrils of the vitreous? Did you ever see under the analog microscope? Never. This is the beauty of magnification. Now coming to the second aspect, that is field of view. Such a panoramic field of view at such a high magnification not only helps you in unraveling the mystery of complex vitreoretinal interrelation, it gives you more predictability in your end stage. And you can see without a single iatrogenic break, you have done a beautiful surgery. Another case of it, 270-degree GRT, where I'm unraveling and opening the funnel. Not only can you see the edges, but also the disc as sharp as you would love to see. And that is the beauty of panoramic field of view extended. Now coming to the depth of field, yes, this is a tabletop TRD, which will give you hard burns. Well, just look at the way I'm dissecting. The audacity is just because of the depth which it pursues, which is 40 to 60% more than the analog microscope, and that too at such a phenomenal magnification. Well, digitalization has improved the quality of images of a overexposed to such a well-balanced image, or color tone mapping, which allows you a better viewing of tissues which you see. And all this is possible at an illumination which is just 1/10 of the microscope, which means less chances of phototoxicity. Filters are an additional benefit which helps you in perceiving the tissue in a more better way when it is not well seen under a xenon or a light. Nothing is more precious than surgeon's health or your own health. And here it is the beauty of the surgical ergonomics. And importantly, you are not going to carry all the knowledge which you acquire, but it has to be shared with your postgraduates. And here it allows all the learning amongst the postgraduates. These are few of the atypical cases. This is giant retinal tear where I'm operating under a 3D system, the most complicated system. And you can see 270-degree GRT, well done. This is a case of a retinoschisis where absence of RP really gives a pain, difficulty in weaving the ILM. And after staining and with a particular filters, you can visualize even in these cases. Well, you will say only for retina, I can't invest. Well, is it really possible beyond? Yes, this article of ours is in print in IGO July 2021, where we studied the efficacy and safety of 3D surgeries in varied anterior segment procedures like phaco. And this is what we concluded. So these are some of the challenging cases. This is a phaco in a grade 5 cataract being done over here. This is a case where I'm doing a phaco with the iris repair in a case of a corneal opacity post-traumatic. And you can see the iris repair also being done. Pterygium, squints, well, traps, amath glaucoma valves. These are the proofs which I can show where it can be used. Besides, we have a wealth of literature to support the use and the efficacy of it. So to summarize, the 3D digital surgery is the need of our because of the magnification, enhanced depth image, increased peripheral acuity, all at low cost and color light mapping. So if you see better, naturally you are going to deliver better. So friend, it's up to you to decide whether you will still like to gaze the moon without a microscope or simple telescope, or you would like to have the most details on the surface of moon with reflecting, refracting telescopes. Well, economics, lock dollars in your lockers or make a strategic move instead of storing the dollar in the locker, and it will give you a peaceful sleep. So well said by Einstein, if you do what you always do, you will get what you always got. So shed the indifference towards the technology, be an early adapter, and then keep the flag flying of your hospital and be a team leader, be a country leader in the technology. Thank you.
Now, well said, sir. Now we'll call upon Dr. Khare sir from Pune to put up his case as to the IP still reigns supreme in vitrectomy surgeries. Bhushan Khare sir, please, you can start off your talk.
Right, am I audible?
Sir,
Am I audible, please?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. So after a magnificent presentation by Dr. Prashant, he has the advantage that he's been using the system. I've attended his OT, and I appreciate the beauty of what we see on the screen when he's using the system. However, I have to defend what the conventional IP still gives us. I would like to thank AIOS for having given me this opportunity. Now, looking at the evolution of ophthalmic surgery, especially vitreous surgery, it paralleled the technological additions to the surgical microscope. Tiltable eyepieces, great depth of field, good resolution of the eyepieces, coupled with XY coupling of the microscope, has taken us to this day. Visualization is the key, and as systems have evolved over time to the present day, non-contact visualization systems, we have reached the state-of-art VR surgery today. What the system which Dr. Prashant said, it uses digital images from the image of our old microscope. It manipulates and processes the image and magnifies it on the screen. Different systems use different technologies in which Polaroid glasses can be used to separate the images for the two eyes, leading to depth perception. However, in this process, there is a conflict between convergence and accommodation of the surgeon. Some surgeons don't get adjusted to this abnormal binocular vision if there is especially too much disparity between the right and the left eyes. Now, coming to surgical performance, most of the studies have even today shown that the gold standard is still the eyepieces with the conventional microscope to which it is compared. In some studies, they've shown decrease in operative fluency, which I may discount as a learning curve. But all studies emphasize that resolution is surely better with a microscope. With the new system, magnification is used to overcome this drawback. Most of the cases where comparison was done, surgical time was the same, success rate is the same, the complication rate is too the same in both different procedures. However, the drawbacks which have been mentioned in the studies say that there is difficult logistics, cost is exorbitant, assistants may feel some discomfort, and especially we should be beware of sudden head movement by the patient. The system, different systems which are available here, they are both active as passive. In the active system, it is said to be less strenuous onto the eye, but all the systems which are optically good for the surgeon, they are very good for the anterior and the mid-vitreous cavity. As we go close to the peripheral retina, or as we go too close to the retina, there may be depth perception difficulties faced by some surgeons. I presume those surgeons who have a good accommodation amplitude have no difficulty in using this system, but it may not suit all surgeons. Version accommodation conflicts do cause visual fatigue and discomfort, and it may be worsening pre-existing exophorias. Incomplete separation of both eye images, especially in the passive 3D systems, may be causing this difficulty. So the main complaints were difficulty of anticipating movement of patient during scleral indentation. Opacities in the anterior segment may be magnified in view in this system. And in some surgeons have complained of nausea and dizziness, especially with prolonged laser photocoagulation. Different systems have started adapting to this sort of difficulty, where head-mounted systems have been manufactured by Sony, and there is a different device which is manufactured by a company in Israel, which also is head-mounted, and they also don't use a conventional operating microscope. These head-mounted devices allow the surgeon to see through the lower part of this device onto the operating field. There is a greater depth perception and spatial orientation, and a lesser learning curve as described by those who use them. Now coming to the machine as such, as we've seen the technology evolve, it is in the early majority which we see, maybe even less than that. And if it doesn't sustain at the cost offered to the customer, it may die out slowly. The technology is good, but whether it is to be bought by the majority and it is usable and cost efficient is the question. Thank you.
Well said, sir. Since both of you have put up your points very well, I think I should still be sticking on to my analog, or like Paul Sir said, the analog microscope, and continue with what I'm doing. Thank you very much, sir.
I didn't want to trouble Dr. Shilpi, but she has taken my side by saying that even after using Ingenuity, she needs to put a belt buckle in all cases. Whereas Dr. Mandar with the conventional one defends a pure vitrectomy.
Yes.
So that speaks for me.
Yes, sir. Yes. So we will move on ahead with our debates. I'll call upon Dr. Mandar to discuss about phaco-vitrectomy done by a single surgeon, and I'll be debating him regarding two-surgeon approach for the phaco-vitrectomies. Mandar, please go ahead.
Mandar, your first slide should be saying that his wife is a phaco surgeon and not mine.
Not only my wife, my brother as well.
So my case I'm putting is that phaco-vitrectomy should be done and should always be done by a single surgeon. So phaco-vitrectomy is now in vogue because it reduces the need of two sequential surgeries. It provides a clear media for the vitrectomy for the surgeon to operate. There's no chance of lens touch if you want, and the comfort and convenience for the patient. So what are the perceived advantages of using two surgeons for one phaco and one vitrectomy? That it brings two experts in two separate fields to give the best of the results to patients. So in terms of low intraoperative complications, gives better vitrectomy settings, and low complications leads to better outcome for cataract surgery. There is no wasting of energy. Second argument is given is that there is no wastage of surgery of energy for the vitreoretinal surgeon in doing phaco, and he can give his 100% attention to the vitrectomy surgery. So now, to understand why these are perceived advantages, we have to know why there are two surgeons came into first. Because phaco-vitrectomy first started around 10-15 years back, and it coincided with the advent of the small gauge vitrectomy, which gives the advantage of sutureless surgery thoroughly, totally complete sutureless surgery pack. In those times, the senior experienced retinal surgeons had no exposure to the phaco during their trainings, and phaco training was restricted to the main centers, and they probably may have had some ego issues and adjustment issues to learn phaco emulsification from the start. Now, how I will debunk these perceived advantages that two experts in two separate fields give the best of the results. So most of us are now getting trained in cataract phacosurgery in the postgraduate studies itself. So we are well acquainted with the phacosurgery, and the majority of vitreoretinal surgeons are now increasingly operating cataract cases, pure cataract cases with phacoemulsification and oil and IOL. So they are now well versed with the phaco. They can operate it without causing any complications, without giving good results for the phaco itself. And the second point is there is no wasting of energy for vitreoretinal surgeon in a phaco. So really, you are talking about a case of 10-15 minutes surgery, maybe 30 minutes, 25 minutes maximum. Is it that really extra surgical time for a vitreoretinal surgeon who are used to do surgeries for 2 hours, 1 to 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours? I don't think so. Now, what I will put out for the advantage for the single surgeons are there is no need to coordinate. There is no management issues. You don't have to take appointment time from the phaco surgeon, wait for him to come. You don't have to waste time in interchanging, taking over from him and starting your surgery. And it takes some time to get into the surgery. So it overall takes a lot of time out of your OT time. When you do as a one surgeon, both surgeries become one integrated seamless surgery. You transit from phaco directly into vitrectomy. Then you go at the end of the surgery, you can again go back to the AC, wash the vitreous, adjust the lens if you want, and come out. So you don't, it becomes one total surgery and not two separate surgeries done at one time. You know your incisions, the strength and weakness of those points of surgery, your phaco incisions and your side ports. And so you can plan well with the vitrectomy incisions where you want to put your trocars, and you can do the same with your phaco incisions. So your phaco surgeon doesn't know that, and he will put where he feels it okay for him to put his incision. And sometimes you want to place a trocar even before starting the phaco surgery, so that there is nothing coming out when you put pressure on the trocar. So that can also be done. Now the phaco surgeon has just one goal: safe phaco and IOL implantation. Beyond that, he doesn't want to maintain the clarity of the IOL or pupillary size. Now VR surgeon is more careful about the corneal clarity because he has to go in and operate, do some ILM peelings or some base excisions. So he is very more careful about the corneal clarity issues than the phaco surgeon. And any issues with IOL decentration happening during the vitrectomy can be effectively dealt with the same surgeon at the end, and you don't have to call him again back for this thing or giving the final AC wash. So this is just a small video which I have forward without editing, without cutting anything. You can see we have started the surgery. It's going fast. Well, just forward it. Just you can see in 11 minutes, I'm done with the phaco. Directly, I can go with the trocar, put the trocar in. I'll put my chandelier in. And in 14 minutes, I'm ready to go for vitrectomy. So, and out of all, nothing you can beat this is the economic advantage. You don't have to share the cost with anyone. Everything is yours. So just think yourself, if you can do one surgery, you can do both. It just needs a mind preparation, that's all. Thank you.
Yes, you're right, Mandar. Very well put up. I'll just have a few points from my side to try to convince for a two different surgeon approach. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, yes.
So as you have already said that phaco-vitrectomy by a single surgeon is good, and as Bhavan sir was mentioning at the beginning of your discussion that my wife is a phaco surgeon, and that's why probably I'm in this. I'm debating on this. But if you look at it, as you have already told, phaco-vitrectomy is becoming the routine in most practices. And that's because patient comfort, we can avoid multiple surgeries, post-op care is better, and the surgeon comfort is there, hospital comfort, ease of billing, ease of patient care, and insurance claim may be a hassle, but then yes, that is a different issue that we'll need a separate place to discuss about. When I say phaco-vitrectomy as a two-surgeon approach, if I look at it from the patient's perspective or the patient's outcome and comfort, the patient would always be happy that his regular doctor is operating on his or her cataract. When I mean that his or her regular doctor, it means that most of the times these cataract patients with some VR problem are referred to the VR surgeon by the anterior segment surgeon. And he or she is a regular patient with the anterior segment doctor. And when the patient on that table knows that his or her anterior segment surgeon or the cataract surgeon who had referred the patient to the VR surgeon is going to operate, their comfort level is totally different. So we have to look at it from the patient's perspective as well, rather than just looking at it from our side that, we are saving time, we are keeping the money. And obviously, as you had mentioned in your slides as well, that, we can have a better outcome of surgery done by a trained phaco surgeon who's doing these kind of cataract surgeries or phaco surgeries day in, day out, probably doing about 10 to 15 a day, and we would be doing much less. So all in all, there are lesser chances of complications, and we have a happier patient at the end of the day. Then I would also like to look at the surgeon's comfort. Definitely, I will be having palpitations when I have to do a cataract in a patient which is already a VR case. Already I will be stressed out with giving the best possible outcome as regards the VR surgical outcome is. And in that, or on top of that, I will have to take care of the phaco as well. So reducing my palpitations, reducing my stress would be of prime importance. If my stress levels are less, that would reflect on my surgery. So that is there. The second thing that I would want to stress here is phaco training has to be done after we do a VR training. I can name most of the big institutes in the country which are giving very good VR training to all of us, but none of them incorporate the phaco training component at the same time. And I would want to ask you directly, how many PGs passing out of most of the institutions across the country, mainly the government institutions, tend to get phaco handpiece in their hand? Forget about phaco surgeries. They don't even know to do, they get hardly about 20 to 30 phacos. I'm talking about medical colleges. DNB, yes, in Arvind Eye Hospital, Shankar Netralaya, Shankar Eye Hospital, LV Prasad, they all do quite a few surgeries. But I don't think medical colleges across the country give more than 100 cases of cataract. Forget about the phaco part now. So ultimately, we have to do a phaco training in addition to our VR training. So we are again going to waste another month or two just doing phaco training. Additional time consumption, you have already mentioned about it. Yes, I would take it as 14 minutes gone before my surgery starts. And at the end of the day, the anterior segment surgeon is happy because he has operated upon his own patient, and there is no loss of revenue or no loss of patient for the anterior segment surgeon to a VR surgeon. The hospital billing, yes, the billing team is very happy because they can always charge the surgeons, which can be added to the billing, and the insurance claims can be enhanced by adding a visiting surgeon charges to the VR surgery or to the cataract surgery. So all in all, it is a win-win situation for all. Then why should we not do a double surgeon approach for phaco-vitrectomy? Thank you. So with this,
Good,
sorry.
Yeah, good counterpoints.
Thank you. Any points from Pawan Kure sir?
See, if you have a wife who is an anterior segment surgeon, it will also buy peace for you by not operating.
Exactly. See,
Mandari,
so many positive points are there, sir. Then why should we? Now I'll call upon Dr. Is Dr. Aditya Kelkar sir there?
Yes, I'm ready.
Sir,
Vijay
please,
Chandra.
Dr. Aditya Kelkar sir is from Pune. He's presented a lot of presentations across national and international conferences. And sir, आपका नाम JKS परिहार के नाम से है. That's why I was confused a little bit. Sir, please present your debate on ILM peeling in ERM surgery, which is to be done always.
Yes, I hope I can. I hope the slides are visible right now.
yes, Aditya.
Yeah. So I am going to present about my experience, and I always do this ILM peeling along with ERM removal, always. So I don't have any financial interest. I would like to take you to some scientific knowledge about ILM. First of all, I know that you are all eminent retinal surgeons, but I still need to take you back to some basics. Basement membrane between the neuroretina and vitreous is the ILM, and it provides a support to the surface of contractile cells, and therefore it acts as a scaffold for cellular proliferation in pathophysiology of disorders which affect the vitreomacular interface. So with that, we should also know that there are two different types of epiretinal membranes. Type 1 epiretinal membrane is the one which has collagenous layer interspersed between the ILM and the cells, and there's a cleavage plane that exists between the ILM as well as and the ERM. So it's an easy removal of the membrane. Removing only the first membrane causes certain amount of collagen and cellular debris to remain over the surface of ILM, and it gives scope for a reproliferation. Now this is a video which shows how this type 1 ERM behaves. You can see that there is a cleavage plane. I am staining the ERM under air, and I am removing the ERM first. And obviously, because there is a gap between the ERM and ILM, this has to be now separately attacked. After the removal of the ERM tissue, I'm going to stain again the internal limiting membrane and then remove the ILM separately. So this is what happens with type 1 ERMs. Now I'm making a small initial nick with the diamond dusted membrane scraper, and once I have a small edge, then I can use my forceps to remove the internal limiting membrane, and with that it becomes a relatively traumatic surgery. And with this, we are sure, as the OCT shows, there's a complete removal of the epiretinal membrane, and there's obviously removal of the ILM also along with it. Coming to type 2 membranes, these are composed of cells that are not going to directly proliferate over the internal limiting membrane. So there's no tissue in between ILM and the ERM. And so whenever we remove the epiretinal membrane in these cases, you can see that most of the times the ILM also comes off along with the ERM. So there's no reason to separately remove it, but you are going to remove it simultaneously as it is. So here you can see, once again, I go in with the diamond dusted membrane scraper, I make a small nick and then remove this tissue. This is obviously an epiretinal membrane, and which is along with the internal limiting membrane coming off beautifully. I stain to confirm that there is no internal limiting membrane material left. And once again, even if I scrape with the diamond dusted membrane scraper, you can see there's hardly anything left behind. So this was a membrane where a type 2 membrane where internal limiting membrane and the ILM came off together. And the OCT confirms that there's no residue on the retinal surface. So there are numerous studies that confirm that ILM removal during the surgery is beneficial because it can prevent recurrences. It has improved anatomical as well as better visual outcomes. There's a histological study by Gibran et al. If you want to go through it, obviously it helps. It shows us how ILM removal is important. Similarly, there is a study by Parley et al. And Bowie et al. They have also proven beyond doubt that ILM peeling is a must in all cases of epiretinal membrane peeling cases. Of course, there are contraindications, especially if Dr. Manish Bapa is operating, it's a contraindication. And yes, and then there is a second contraindication, and that is you must preserve the ILM in case there is a cellular retinal thinning or circulatory or metabolic disorder in cases such as glaucoma. In these cases, you may want to leave the ILM behind. Also, as you know, Dr. Manish is a very busy practitioner and is a very avid cyclist. So if he has to go for his cycling ride, he obviously has no time to look after the ILM, and that's the reason why he's debating against me to preserve the internal limiting membrane. So mind you, audience, don't take what he is saying as a gospel truth. It has to be taken with a pinch of salt and a pinch of brilliant blue dye. Thank you.
Well said. Very interesting points about Manish sir here. I didn't know about these things, but we'll go ahead with what Manish sir has to say. Manish sir is from Nashik, and sir, please go ahead, and we'll like to listen to what you have to tell us about the island peeling in ERM.
I hope my slides are visible and I'm audible.
Yes, sir. Very good.
Okay. Now, as far as the physical fitness goes, you can see on video who's fitter and who's spending more time at gym and on cycle. So, you know, you can, that point is taken care of. Having said that, let me come to my topic of ILM peeling. If we can, it's better avoided, especially in primary cases. Let's see, look at the points which are in favor of ILM peeling in ERM cases. So it ensures complete removal of ERM. There is a significant reduction in recurrence of ERM formation. It appears to be a safe procedure and if done properly in atraumatic fashion. That if is very important here. And the surgical videos look really good, as we just saw in Dr. Aditya's presentation. However, the videos of ERM removal as well can look nice. Here is a aspiration scraper that I made, and you can see the ERM is being peeled superficially without touching the retinal surface at all. You know, you can just suck it off the retinal surface by scraping it off from the retinal surface, and there is no trauma whatsoever to the retina here. So coming to the, let's look at some literature. This is the summary of anatomical functional results of ERM and ILM studies, where it shows similar improvement in best corrected visual acuity and degree of metamorphosis in both groups. The recurrence of ERM is statistically insignificant in both groups. In fact, there is only one randomized control trial by Tranos et al., which has showed that there is 0% recurrence even if ERM is peeled alone. But ERM recurrence is reported between 20 and 0 to 21% of cases in ERM alone group, and 30% of these are only visually significant, meaning that only 30% require resurgery of all the patients who have undergone. Dr. Aditya has spoken about importance of ILM, and so has Dr. Shamik. So we all know it's a footplate of Mueller cells. It is embryologically important for proper development of the neuroretinal structures, and there is embryological absence of ILM causes these end feet of neuroepithelial cells to retract from vitreal surface, which results in disorganized and abnormally thickened ganglion cells. But in adults, the removal doesn't seem to be affecting the structure or the visual function too much, supposedly. Let's look at the complications that can happen with ILM peeling. Intraocular dye toxicity, as Dr. Shamik has already talked about most of these things. The ICG, which is used commonly in US, we know it's toxic, but even the BBG dye, which is considered to be safe, is possibly toxicity has been reported if there is an accidental subretinal injection of the dye. Mueller cell dysfunction leads to these Mueller cells, they contribute to retinal homeostasis and formation of B wave ERG, and delayed implicit time and reduced B wave amplitude are shown in delayed recovery of focal macular ERG. So this is a picture showing on the left. This is in macular hole surgery. Here we can see the pictures on the left side are of where ILM was not peeled. We can see the recovery is much faster as compared to the pictures on the right side, where there is a delayed recovery after ILM peeling. So paracentral macular hole. This happens even after atraumatic ILM peeling. So the complications that I'm talking about are in perfectly good surgery where there is no complications done, no complication interop and done by done by an experienced surgeon. Still, it can happen when there is atraumatic ILM peeling, it can be seen with any dye used, and it happens because there is a trauma to Muller cells, which leads to loss of glial tissue supporting retinal structure, which in turn leads to retinal hole formation, which is usually paracentral. The microperimetry studies have shown that there is reduced retinal sensitivity in area of ILM peeling, and as a result, which can happen because direct damage to Muller cells, and it leaves paracentral microscotomas. Dissociated optic nerve fiber layer, which has been described by Tadayoni and later by other people with other names. It's basically arcuate retinal striae along with the optic nerve fibers, and they appear darker than surrounding region. It is associated with inner retinal thinning, which is important, but may not be associated with any visual dysfunction. The similar phenomenon is named by Spade et al. As inner retinal dimpling, and as concentric macular dark spots on ANFAS OCT by Alcabas et al. Retinal phototoxicity, which can happen because of prolonged exposure, photochemical changes because of the chromophores which are used, like ICG dye, and reactive oxygen species production, which leads to lipid peroxidation and cell membrane loss, and photomechanical damage because of trauma by the light pipe directly if the surgeon is not careful. So in summary, peeling of ILM does not improve visual outcome. It may be associated with visually significant consequences like paracentral scotoma, paracentral macular holes, and ERG abnormalities. Patients who require repeat surgery may not be significant numbers so as to justify peeling ILM in every single case of idiopathic ERM surgery. Thank you for your kind attention. You are muted, Shamik. You are muted.
Thank you very much. It was a very good debate on all the topics that we had. Just a question for Shilpi ma'am. Ma'am, do you still use sutures for the buccal fixation, or you do a tunnel technique? Just a question. I also do buckling for many of my RD surgeries. I'm not contradicting your point, but just wanted to know what you do. Whether you guys use a suture or you guys are doing
just a single suture.
Suture.
Single suture.
Right.
Instead of a band tie, we are using.
Yes, but then what I noticed was doing a tunnel in the sclera takes lesser of the time, and passing that thing is easier.
Yeah, I said band tie. For band tie, we use 50 ethibond. Otherwise, it's a tunnel through anchor the suture, anchor the buckle.
Anchor the band. Okay.
We don't do. We had to debate.
Okay.
But we had to be strong. So, Bhushan, that is what I would like to bring to your notice.
So, say what you do.
Debate is there. It is a scientific thing. We wanted to evolve a consensus rather than send a message. So, whatever, even if you give me a losing point, I am going to defend it.
Also now, because you and Aditya both have the systems,
Yeah.
I just want to ask you, the cost of the system is so high. Secondly, we cannot pass on the cost in any way to a patient. How do you manage to sort of pass the cost on your side?
No, it's the volumes which dilutes the whole concept of, charging it to a patient. Second thing, what I always keep on saying is certain technologies, if they are really going to offer you better success rate and better satisfaction end result, it is worth investing for your own benefit and for the faith which your patient had trusted in you. When they rest your eyes under you, then they sleep, get your eyes operated by you, they have this faith. So instead of locking your money in the locker, I invest back in their faith. That is what I would put it as. Aditya, your say.
You are ready to become president now, sir.
So I have a slightly different view on the 3D technology. I still feel that it's a good technology, but it's still not a must for everybody. And of course, the cost is very prohibitive. I do enjoy using the intraoperative OCT along with the heads-up surgery, because then you don't have to look through the microscope and then again look at the screen to see how the OCT looks like. So that is certainly an advantage, but as such, I don't think it has at least with the current technology, it may not replace the binoculars completely. The binocular microscope is still here to stay.
Why do you say, which are the cases, Aditya, where you feel the need of binocular microscope instead of a screen?
I mean, I would say it the other way around. Do I really need the three-dimensional microscope? I would put it the other way around. Will I not be able to do the same surgery under the binoculars? I will be able to, with the same efficacy and with the same results and with a lesser cost, about which I agree with Dr. Bhushan. The advantage that I see with this technology is that I don't have to look through the binoculars and then again look at the screen for looking at the intraoperative OCT. That's an advantage I see, but it definitely does not match the cost that it incurs.
Yeah, because you went for Zeiss.
I feel that it's still an intermediate level technology. It will evolve even more, and maybe with time the microscope completely would vanish and we might have just a headband supporting in front of us. Maybe that's the way forward, but this probably still seems to be an intermediate level technology.
For me,
something like,
Sir, I
for example,
contradict you in this.
yeah, Shilpi?
Yes, I contradict Aditya, sir, because the illumination, the depth and the field you are getting with the Ingenuity, it is not at all comparable with the microscope.
Yeah,
That is for sure.
So
I'll tell you
how
how it is.
you,
Our eyes-
which cases do you go for this heads up and which go for conventional?
See, that's what I'm saying, that I generally wouldn't say that which cases require heads up surgery. I would prefer to do binocular surgery as well. If I
What
am
you do?
running short of time,
What you do? That's all.
it really depends on how much time I have. And my OTs are arranged in such a way that we have 3 operation theaters, and whichever cases come to the first operation theater, they are done under the RTO 800, and all VR cases come under the RTO 800 OT. I do use binoculars as well. I mean, it's not something which I'm averse to using.
I would also
The
answer that.
three-dimensional microscope also has this filters, additional filters that they have provided with RTO. I think, yeah, there are advantages, not that there are no advantages as such, but I am saying that it still doesn't at the moment replace the binoculars completely. Like we have a phaco machine in our armamentarium. Without phaco machine, you will not be able to do a cataract surgery now. Of course, you can do a small incision, but it's no comparison to phaco. So similarly, three-dimensional microscope is there definitely, but definitely it doesn't still totally take away binocular microscope as of now.
I would differ here in the sense, had I had a financial pocket like Aditya, I would have had it even in my second theater. Somehow my second theater has an analog microscope. I'm not that rich, so I can't afford that. Otherwise, given an option, if I have to choose between the two, I would definitely go for other theater as well with a 3D heads-up surgery. Because for me, I definitely feel as you go along investing more time on this RTView or on Ingenuity, you would realize that it offers you a better magnification, which is unparalleled, and the illumination and everything, all the depth which is seen is unparalleled, and that translates into a better result. I think, yeah, Shamik, the course instructor.
So, these points are still there on debate. That means that whether to or not to. But then there are a few where we have already put our hands down and we are already doing ILM peeling probably, all of us, for ERM and for RD. But then these are points of debate and we should be talking it more scientifically over here. And I think we had a very good course where we could bring these points out and discuss it out on this forum. As regards the 3D heads up, yes, there are still a little bit of controversies going on. Let us see. I think the main problem with the heads up display probably would be the cost, which is a big factor which puts all the surgeons down on whether to go ahead with it. But yes, it must be a fantastic equipment that you must be having, and you must be really enjoying it. But then that's what we have to say. दूर से अंगूर खट्टे वाला चक्कर है और कुछ नहीं. पर वो बहुत बड़ा छेद भी छोड़ जाता है अपने जेब को. So let us see in due course of time, probably the technology would evolve and we could probably have a better system like what Kelkar sir was saying. So I think if things are all okay, we'll bring this course to an end, and we'll hand the hall over to the hall coordinators. Is it okay?
Yeah, thank you, Shamik, and
Thank you,
everyone.
Shamik.
Thank you all.
everyone.
Thanks a lot, Shamik, for
Thank you.
involving us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much,
everybody.
Dr. Shamik, for being such a wonderful chairperson, and all to the wonderful speakers for illuminating